This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Rizdal. The list of things, by which I mostly mean commodities, that are all of a sudden in short supply because of the war we have talked about quite a bit the past couple of weeks. Wheat and sunflower oil and nickel. Also today, a new one, neon. Yes, neon as in neon signs, but more strategically in today's economy, neon as in essential to semiconductor manufacturing. Russia and Ukraine together produce a whole lot of neon. And all that gas suddenly becoming unavailable? Well, that is definitely not what the already stressed chip industry needs. Marketplace's Stephanie Hughes has that one.
Those bright glowing signs that say eat at Nick's or open or Yingling, they consume a tiny fraction of the world's neon.
Neon signs are 1 or 2% of the world's production, or demand. It's very small.
Richard Betzendahl is in the neon business, you might say. He runs a consulting firm that does market research on gases. He says most of the world's neon is used in a light source of a different kind, lasers.
Excimer lasers, which is the high-powered laser that can drill holes through metal and so forth. It needs neon.
Those lasers are critical to the process of manufacturing semiconductor chips. They etch circuit patterns onto wafers of silicon. Nina Turner is an analyst with IDC.
It's creating it's a puzzle piece. You're taking these different patterns and putting them down on the wafer.
Turner says that process is used to manufacture 90% of the chips made today, including those used in cars, memory, and power management, all areas where there are already chip shortages. And with the neon shortage on the way,
I think companies are downplaying their worry, but I do think that they are putting contingency plans into place as we speak.
Turner says most companies have a couple months' worth of neon on hand. And the Semiconductor Industry Association, a trade group for American chip makers, says the industry has a diverse set of suppliers. That's partly because it's been in this position before. The last time Russia invaded Ukraine 8 years ago, neon prices shot up. Here's industry consultant Richard Betzendahl again.
That was a bad time. And what happened back then was China, they then put in a lot of neon capacity.
Even with Chinese plants capturing and exporting neon, Russia and Ukraine remain critical to the supply chain. Cryoin Engineering is located in southern Ukraine, in the port city of Odessa. It exports. Larissa Bondarenko is the business development director there. She says Cryoin has stopped production and shipments are already delayed. She's concerned bombing will damage the company's plant or key transportation infrastructure.
There's a high risk that ports will be destroyed, then the logistics will be much, much harder to restart.
She's also worried about Cryoin's workforce. Bondarenko says 80% of the company's employees are men who are now required to defend the country. I'm Stephanie Hughes for Marketplace.
Chinese President Xi Jinping doesn't think much of Western sanctions on Moscow. In a conference call today with Macron of France and Scholz of Germany, Xi said the sanctions are a blow to the stability of global finance, energy, and transportation and supply chains, which perhaps helps explain why China continues to trade with Russia, as does the possibility that Beijing might just be able to get itself some deals, huh? Marketplace's Jennifer Pack has that one.
Music on the street selling mostly Russian products in China's northeastern Heilongjiang. The province shares a part of its border with Russia. Most of the shops here in Harbin City sell identical Russian biscuits, vodka, and chocolates with a chubby baby on the packaging. Some of those items have recently been flying off the virtual shelves of an online vendor that claims to be backed by the Russian embassy in China. Sergei Batsev of the Russian Chamber of Commerce in China taped a video message for Chinese consumers.
Dear Chinese friends, thank you for supporting Russia and the shop during this difficult time.
The difficult time he's referring to means the Western sanctions Russia is facing for its war in Ukraine. Now, the law of supply and demand says if fewer countries want to do business with Russia, supply goes up. And since China is Russia's biggest trade partner, it could negotiate cheaper prices for Russian exports, like oil and gas. It's possible, but not likely, says Xiong Peng, a global commodities trader in Beijing.
The reasoning is that the price of commodities like natural gas is decided over a long period with complex calculation. You can't just use today's price to decide the price for the next 20 years.
Also, he says the buyers of Russian oil and gas are mainly Chinese government firms, and they don't always make deals based on profits. And as for trade the other way, selling to Russia, things aren't going well there for Chinese exporters either. Russia's currency, the ruble, has fallen by a lot against the US dollar, which, as the e-commerce news site EN News lays out, is a problem.
The depreciation of the Russian ruble will impact Chinese and foreign companies because China-Russia trade is mainly settled in US dollars. Even if Chinese suppliers don't increase the price, Russian buyers still need to pay more rubles to buy the same products. So Russian clients won't place as many orders.
And some Chinese suppliers fear their Russian clients can't pay with the sanctions in place. Chinese officials say they are neutral on the war, but China has chosen Russia's side, which isn't a problem for now, says commodities trader Xiong Peng.
As long as China does not change its current stance and officials continue to say ambiguous comments that don't amount to much, China won't be directly sanctioned.
Even if China wanted to show support to Russia and buy more oil and gas, it's not that easy because there isn't enough infrastructure to support this, he says.
China can't find enough oil tankers to ship Russian oil. Many shipping companies are afraid of being sanctioned for shipping Russian oil. And as for natural gas, the pipeline from Russia is behind schedule. It has only reached China's northeast to Harbin City.
The war in Ukraine has consequences beyond that country and Russia. Take logistics, which are already under pressure worldwide from the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's a video by e-commerce consultant Mangler Technology.
For air transportation, bypassing Russian airspace means it takes longer to ship products. The war has also pushed up the price of oil, the biggest cost for airlines, and transportation prices.
So shipping stuff out takes longer and costs more, which may be why that online Russian shop, thankful as it is for Chinese consumer support, also issued a plea. Again, Batsiv of the Russian Chamber of Commerce in China.
I ask you for your patience and understanding. It will take longer for you to receive the orders.
Please, he tells Chinese consumers, avoid unnecessary orders. In Shanghai, I'm Jennifer Pack for Marketplace.
This final note on the way out today, news from the good people at Quinnipiac, the pollsters. It is Quinnipiac, by the way, not the other way you sometimes hear it. I emailed them, asked them, Quinnipiac. Anyway, Americans, 71% to 22%, say they support a ban on Russian oil, even if it means higher gas prices here. And that is across party lines. Dems, 82 to 12, Independents, 70 to 22, and Republicans, 66 to 30. I'm just going to leave that there because honestly, I find that kind of heartening.
Marketplace is supported by Viking. Exploring the world in comfort, Viking offers a small ship experience with cultural enrichment and destination-focused dining. More at Viking.com. And by PayStand, working to deliver frictionless B2B payments as a service to over 350,000 companies. Paystand.com/marketplace. B2B payments reimagined. And by Charles Schwab. Schwab understands that wealth management is personal. That's why Schwab offers flexible, personalized financial planning crafted for their investors' individual goals. Learn more at schwab.com.
All right, we're out of here, but here is your moment of economic context. Commodities once again, because that is kind of the name of the macroeconomic game right now. We talked about nickel yesterday. Prices going up so fast, the London Metal Exchange has had to stop trading altogether in that major industrial metal. But what about the nickel? Well, as of today, the amount of nickel in a nickel is worth 4.7 cents. The amount of copper in a nickel is worth 3.9 cents. Y'all can do the math, right? Our digital and on-demand team includes Carrie Barber, Siobhan Brett, Dylan Mietinen, Janet Wynn, Olga Oxman, Donna Tam, and Tony Wagner. I'm Kai Rizdal. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This This is APM.
This is 90.7 WFAE Charlotte, 90.3 WFAG Hickory, 106.1 Laurinburg, 93.7 Southern Pines. We're live, we're local, we're Charlotte's NPR news source. Support this evening comes from WFAE members and the Charlotte Pride Band presenting A Celebration of Diversity, featuring Victor Wang, principal flute from the Charlotte Symphony Orchestra, March 12th at Park Road Church. Tickets available at charlotteprideband.org/tickets. 8 years ago, Charlotte ranked 50 out of 50 of the nation's largest metro areas in an upward mobility study by Harvard. That ranking spurred action from city leaders to improve mobility in the city. So where are we now? We've gathered local leaders and city officials to take stock at where we were and how far we've come in the effort to improve outcomes for our city. Hear from them during our special EQUALibrium conversation, live coming up next on Charlotte Talks.
From 90.7 WFAE, I'm Mary C. Curtis, and this is EQUALibrium, a public conversation on race and equity in Charlotte. 8 years ago in 2014, Charlotte ranked 50 out of 50 of the nation's largest metro areas in an upward mobility study from Harvard University. The study painted a bleak outlook for Charlotte's poorest residents, but served as a wake-up call for city officials and community members. Leaders took action to address and correct the trends in mobility. Money was raised, programs were launched, and attention was paid to areas like pre-K education, affordable housing, and transportation. So, where are we now? In this special conversation, we've gathered local leaders and experts to look at how far we've come and what still needs to happen to achieve upward mobility in the Queen City. EQUALibrium comes up next. First, the news.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Nick Warden, Vice Chair of the Board of Directors of WFAE. It is such an honor to welcome you all here this evening for EQUALibrium, the first of many events being planned by WFAE's newly formed Race and Equity team. We're very proud of this initiative. The vision of is the vision of WFAE's Chief Content Officer, Judon Marshall, who sadly could not be with us this evening. And she is the veteran journalist, Sarah Mobley Smith, and reporters Gracelyn Doctor and Maria Ramirez Uribe. This evening's conversation will be led by someone all WFA listeners are surely familiar with, Mary C. Curtis, a regular voice on Charlotte Talks Weekly News Roundup. Mary is a columnist on Roll Call. She has contributed to NBC News, NPR, The Washington Post, The Root, ESPN, among other news organizations. She has worked at the New York Times, the Charlotte Observer, the Baltimore Sun, and the Associated Press, and was national correspondent for AOL's Politics Daily. Her coverage specialty is the intersection of politics, culture, and race, which makes her the perfect moderator for this evening's program, which I'm certain you'll find intellectually intriguing and incredibly interesting. Before the show begins, a piece of housekeeping information that you all should please pay attention to. First, this program is being broadcast live over our radio broadcast stations, as well as WFAE's Facebook and YouTube pages. Charlotte Talks executive producer, Wendy Herkey, will give you some details on what to expect during the show. Right now, though, feel free to set your cell phones to silent. I'm so proud to serve on the board of directors of WFAE. This is a very important initiative that we're launching. Every member of the WFAE staff is committed to expanding our coverage and the diversity of our stories. That commitment is being echoed by so many. A few members of our board are with us this evening. If they're here, please take a moment and stand and show yourself if you're here. In addition to supporting the team, with their insights and expertise. Every member of our board donated generously to the campaign fund for this team. Their support, coupled with a generous donation of $200,000 from Wells Fargo, we announced last week, has generated more than $750,000 towards our $1 million goal. You can applaud that now. So I'm glad to offer special thanks to our board chair, Richard Lancaster, for his service and leadership during this fundraising campaign, and to the board member, Mary Tabor Engel, for her tremendous efforts. In addition to making an exceptional donation to the campaign, Mary has worked daily to help raise funds and awareness for this team. Thanks in part to a meeting with Mary hosted at her home, we will be making a special announcement about a large commitment to the campaign very soon. Until then, I encourage each of you to support WFAE's Race and Equity team with a donation now. And since we're currently hosting an on-air fundraising campaign, if you make a donation today, we will thank you for your donation by entering you 40 times to our Lowe's Home Improvement Gift Card raffle, which is quite interesting. You can see the rules for the raffle and donate to WFAE. So with that, I want to just say this is really an important undertaking, not only for our city, but it's for our state and the region. Race and equity has been a pivotal moment in the history of this city. As we kind of reflect on the years of the Chetty study and what that means, we've come to a sort of precipice, I might say. And we have to kind of look inward, look critical, and I'm so excited that this evening's affair will help to do that. So with that, I thank you. And who is up next?
That's me up here.
Wonderful.
Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Herkey, the executive producer for Charlotte Talks. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Nick. We start our show in about 40 seconds, so I'm going to keep this brief. We will have a Q&A after the entire show is over. We've got a couple of breaks during the show, but they're short enough that you're not going to want to get up out of your seat or move. So enjoy it, and this is going to be a great conversation. Thanks for being here.
EQUALibrium, a public conversation on race and equity in Charlotte. We're broadcasting live from Project 658 in Charlotte. Stay tuned right here on 90.7 WFAE, on the WFAE app, or watch the conversation live on WFAE's Facebook page.
This is EQUALibrium, a WFAE public conversation on race and equity in Charlotte. I'm Mary C. Curtis. 8 years ago, in 2014, Charlotte ranked 50 out of 50 of the nation's largest metro areas in an upward mobility study from Harvard University. The Land of Opportunity study painted a bleak outlook for Charlotte's poorest residents, but served as a wake-up call for city officials and community members. Leaders took action to address and correct the trends in mobility. Money was raised, programs were launched, and attention was paid to areas like pre-K education, affordable housing, and transportation. So, where are we now? In this special conversation, we've gathered local leaders and experts to look at how far we've come and what still needs to happen to achieve upward mobility in the Queen City. We're live in front of an audience at Project 658 in Charlotte. And joining me is Vi Lyles, Mayor of Charlotte. Last year, she announced the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative in Charlotte, a public-private partnership dedicated to creating a more equitable Charlotte. Sherry Chisholm is here. She's the Executive Director of Leading on Opportunity Council. This Charlotte organization works to create transformational change in our community's economic mobility outcomes. We're also joined by Sharice Blackman from Westside Community Land Trust, an organization that works to create equity through affordable housing in West Charlotte and beyond. Daniel Valdez is with us. He's the Director of External Affairs at Welcoming America. And we're joined by Eli Portillo. He's the Assistant Director of Outreach and Strategic Partnerships at UNC Charlotte's Urban Institute. And Eli has worked extensively on the topic of transportation. Thank you all for joining us. Now, while we want to look forward to action in tonight's conversation, we're going to begin briefly by taking a step back to 2014, 8 years ago, when the results of the Land of Opportunity study, or the Chetty study, were released. They put Charlotte 50 out of 50 in last place when it came to upward mobility in that region. So, Mayor Lyles, as someone with long time and very deep ties to the community, you weren't mayor at the time, but what was it like to see the results of that study, and what was the reaction here by citizens and city leaders?
Well, first, let me say thank you to WFAE for even having the audacity to talk about race and equity. There are many places in this country that would not dare to touch this topic. It would be too sensitive or too divisive. But one of the things about Charlotte, just like the Chetty study, this conversation is about what we want to be and who we are as a city, as a community, and how do we continue to address tough problems and have open discourse and participation in it. So thank you for all of the panelists that are here, for you, Mary, the whole team for being here. I remember sitting in the convention center at the time when the study was presented. And I had even, I think, a little bit of a hint or preview of it. And I believe that the community did face a moment of like complete awareness, not unawareness, awareness that we were being talked about in a national study by very, very reputable scholars from Harvard, okay? And we were going to figure out what it meant. And that's how I think this whole initiative started. And I'm looking forward to how it continues today. I'm not as close to all of the leading on opportunity work as I was in the past. But I think that we've been steadfast in setting the goals that we want to have. Housing, a good wage, and a place that you can have safety and a quality of life that you would like to have. And I think that's what leading on opportunity is about.
Well, Sherry, let's turn to you, because I know that your organization grew out of the need highlighted in the Chetty study. So if you could explain the mission of your organization and how it grew out of it, and how are you progressing?
Absolutely. Pardon me. Thank you for having us, and thank you to WFAE for having this conversation. As the mayor said, and as you said, Mary, the Chetty report for some folks in our community was a wake-up call. For others, it was a finally people are paying attention. Either way, it created collective consciousness and created a table for us all to have the same conversation. With that collective consciousness, leaders in our community wanted to make sure that it didn't become a report that sat on the shelf, but that we made it actionable for Charlotte. And so a group of community leaders came together to form the task force, which eventually created the task force report that's specific to Charlotte and lists nearly 100 recommendations for what we as a community can do such that we are not 50 out of 50 anymore, and that opportunity is not relegated to your zip code. Leading on Opportunity was then the nonprofit organization that was created to make sure that that report lived on. Fast forward 5 years later, Leading on Opportunity is an organization that seeks to provide the support at a systems level for direct service providers, whether they be nonprofit organizations, government agencies, or business organizations that want what is in the task force report to be true. And so what we do is we provide the facilitation, the strategy, the data, and the policy, if we're doing systems work, to make sure that folks who are in the community doing this work have the support they need to do it well.
Yeah, how do you measure that?
Yeah, so that's a really popular question now, right? And I appreciate the question. The Chetty report came out, and it was based on information from zip codes and tax information, and it gave us a snapshot and a point in time to what had been going on. But what we know to be true is that issues of racial inequity, of systemic inequity, have existed in our country for generations upon generations. And it's not new to us, but we're responding in a new way. So when it comes to us measuring progress, yes, there will be the long-term indicators 30 years from now, but at Leading on Opportunity, we're focused on those interim measures of success. And to do that, it takes two parts. One, of course, we need the deep data and subject matter expertise from folks like Eli and Urban Institute who research this in a very deep way. What we're bringing from Leading on Opportunity that is unique and very vital to the conversation is the community perspective. I think there's been a lot of conversation about, are we still 50 out of 50? Are we 47? Are we 39? Honestly, that doesn't matter when folks who are living in poverty still don't have access to the education they deserve, to the housing they deserve. They're living in food deserts. And so what we're looking to when we measure success is to go to the community and ask them to tell us, has your life improved in demonstrated ways? And how can we then package that as a way to inform what we'll be doing next?
Great. Charisse, I want to turn to you because when we talk about persistent challenges in the community, one of them is certainly affordable housing. And it has only become more pronounced as Charlotte has grown. So what strategies are you working with at the West Side Community Land Trust? And tell us a little bit about your organization, what you're doing, and what what we need to do to get ahead of this persistent problem.
Yeah. So at the Westside Community Land Trust, we focus on creating permanently affordable housing with community-centered development in West Charlotte and beyond. And I think one of the most important strategies that we implement is the Community Land Trust model itself. This model is empirically proven. It's evidence-based. There are over 300 land trusts across the nation that have been implementing this since the civil rights era. And we are one of the only models that exist to ensure permanent affordability and perpetuity without additional subsidy, which I think is very critical, so that we can not only utilize and leverage investments today for housing today, but to ensure affordability both now and in the future for generations to come. Also, one of the strategies that we leverage, much to what Sherry mentioned earlier, is we are completely community-centered in process and practice. So in word and deed, this isn't just a rhetoric thing for us, this is our core, who we are at our core. And so we have a tripartite board of directors where individuals that are most proximate to the challenges maintain the power within their communities. We also have a membership base, and anything that we seek to do through our organization must be approved by those individuals. And so through that type of model, we're able to maintain our proximity to the challenges and to develop responsive solutions versus prescriptive solutions. And we also focus on co-creating those solutions with the experts, which we see as the residents who live in these communities and are affected by these challenges. And so that, I think, are a couple of the strategies that we use and we leverage within our organization, in addition to innovative development as well. So we started with house moves because that was the path of least resistance. So homes were donated to us. We moved those homes across town, renovated them, sold them affordably. And we also started to implement an accessory dwelling unit model where our homeowners can not only purchase a land trust home affordably and build wealth through home ownership, but they're able to also build wealth by having a rental property right in their backyard. And so we've learned that these things are not only possible, but they're very critical in how we approach equitable, affordable housing development.
That's quite a model. Thank you. Daniel, your organization's, yeah, you could applaud that. Very creative strategies. Now, your organization's name is Welcoming America, which signals inclusion.
Yeah.
So Charlotte is a very diverse community. We think about the black and white paradigm, but of course it's much more diverse in many ways, represented by many, many groups. So you're dealing with newcomers who are moving here from all over the world. So what are some of the biggest challenges that newcomers face, and what is your organization providing to make their welcome real?
Yeah, so thank you all for having me here today. Welcoming America works with local communities across the country to help them with their welcoming and belonging and inclusion efforts. The City of Charlotte, through their Office of Mobility, Equity, and Immigrant Inclusion, has been working with us for a number of years in thinking about what does immigrant inclusion work look like in the City of Charlotte, and what we can do to lay the groundwork and the foundation for that kind of work to continue to happen. Charlotte has grown tremendously over the past 20 years. We know that. It certainly has changed in demographics. And a lot of the report that came out, the Chetty study, A lot of that was around the black and white paradigm that exists in this community. And so it's important for us to make sure that we're looking also at our current trends and demographics so that we make sure that we are adding that lens to the efforts that so many organizations here locally are leading around this work, because we don't want to end up in the same place 20, 30 years from now when we're thinking about those families who came to Charlotte and weren't able to work within sort of the community and be part of all aspects of the local community. So it's important for us to think about that as well. And one other thing that I want to sort of mention as well in terms of our work at Welcoming America is that while we certainly focus on newcomers and what that means, particularly for immigrants and refugees, we know that for a long time, particularly black communities have never felt included or welcomed in their local communities. And so we can't have truly welcoming communities if we're also not looking about those communities that have been here for a really long time, that have not felt that inclusion and that belonging effort. So it goes hand in hand, and I think it's a recognition of that work, but also thinking about what are the changing demographics and how can we make sure that we're planning for the long-term infrastructure work that's needed around that.
A lot of work to be done.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes. We'll get to you in a minute, Eli, but we're going to have more of our conversation in a moment. So we're going to take a little break now. This is Equilibrium, a WFAE public conversation.
Saved by the timer, right?
So we've got about 90 seconds before we're back on the air.
Good evening, it's 7:20, and you're
Let's
listening
see.
to a WFAE
I wanted to make sure that I let everybody know that
conversation
afterwards we will have the Q&A. We've got microphones here, so if you've got a question that sort of comes up throughout the conversation, hold on to that, and we will have a time for Q&A after.
Live on WFAE's Facebook page.
Now we've got about a minute.
More information about our race and equity team's coverage at WFAE.org/race-equity. You can also help the team and WFAE during our spring on-air fundraising campaign with a donation now, and we'll enter your name 40 times into a raffle to win a $17,000 gift card, compliments of Lowe's Home Improvement. See the raffle rules and donate now at WFAE.org or call 704-549-9000. And thanks for supporting WFAE.
It's your world. We help you explore it.
Some are calling Russia's invasion of Ukraine the world's first crypto
30.
war. Here's why.
It's your community. We help you understand it.
Trying to gauge where Charlotte is on improving children's odds of escaping poverty is tough. The task force report said there needs to be a dashboard to measure short, medium, and long-term progress.
WFAE's Morning Edition is an essential way to start your day and stay connected to your world. Weekday mornings from 5 to 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
We're back. I'm Mary C. Curtis, and this is Equilibrium, a WFAE public conversation on race and equity in Charlotte. We're live at Project 658 in Charlotte with Mayor Vi Lyles, Sherry Chisholm from Leading on Opportunity, Sharice Blackman from the West Side Community Land Trust, Daniel Valdez from Welcoming America, and Eli Portillo from the UNC Charlotte Urban Institute. And we'll start off this next segment with Eli, who's going to talk about the issue of transportation. Now, the issue of effective transportation solution grows out of housing and so many other issues in many ways. Because of past practices, the city still reflects the reality of a segregated past. And that's affected transportation. Is it where it's needed by all neighborhoods and citizens in Charlotte? Is it close to employment opportunities? Could you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, I think transportation and transit is a really interesting topic because it touches on so many other things. Transportation projects have divided neighborhoods. The highways that came through here cut straight through many black communities. At the same time, some of them were rerouted to go around white communities. So they've baked inequality into it in some ways. Transportation and transit is in many ways highly racialized and tied to how much money you have. Something like 1 in 8 people, households overall in the Charlotte region don't have a car. But if you look at the lowest quintile, the lowest earners, it's close to 1 in 3. So transportation is this issue that reflects and perpetuates a lot of the inequalities we've seen. Because Charlotte is so sprawling, larger land area than all of New York City, 5 boroughs, we have a really auto-dependent city. So if you don't have a car, if you don't have an effective transit option, it's hard to get to a job, it's hard to get to a doctor's appointment. That's something we've been struggling with for years in this city. They've tried to make adjustments at CATS, but the bus system in particular continues to struggle, especially post-COVID. At the same time, I think transit and the conversations we have about building our transit system really reflect this kind of deep-rooted tension in Charlotte, where we want the shiny new things, we want to grow. Charlotte, I don't think it's any secret, is a very boosterish city. You know, we love our skyline, we love our most of our rankings, not the 50th out of 50, obviously. But at the same time, with transit and transportation, there are worries about displacement. With the conversation around the Silver Line, there are concerns about more people being forced to leave neighborhoods in the east and west sides if that really helps development blow up even more there. So we want the shiny new thing, but at the same time, we often see these concerns about equity. And I think that's not just for transportation and transit, that's really baked into the way Charlotte has grown.
What kind of progress is the city making on having these kinds of conversations that meet that balance?
So I think it's on a few different axes. You know, there's the Charlotte Moves plan, which is being discussed right now. $13.5 billion plan would require a sales tax increase. I know that, you know, that's kind of grinding its way through, perhaps.
It's not grinding. Wait a minute now. It might be slow, but we're not grinding.
It's slowly progressing, perhaps, then?
Thank you. You got to be optimistic about these things, especially in my seat anyway.
So there's the public transit discussion that we're having as this community. But at the same time, I think the mayor and other representatives have said that that's not going to solve all our transportation issues, because even if we build these new transit lines, we're still such an auto-dependent city. So I think we have to really talk more about where are we building services, where are we building housing, where are we enabling people to live and work, not just where are we building transit and transportation, because we're not going to solve all these challenges just coming at it from that angle, because it's so deep and systemic.
Yes, Sherry.
Yeah, I would love to add to what Eli said. I am fairly new, actually really new, to Charlotte, and come from a community that also ranks really low on in the Chetty study. What I can say that's true about Charlotte is there's no shortage of conversation. She said, where's the conversation happening? In Charlotte, there are conversations around transportation, around college and career readiness, around early education, et cetera, et cetera. That is really beautiful and something for us to be really proud of. Unfortunately, a lot of those conversations are happening in silos. And so where I think we are now as a community is really to think collaboratively about how that safety net really creates an environment or a community for an individual or a young person to be successful. Transportation won't solve it alone. Early education won't solve it alone. But together, if we're considering these things in unison, that's what leads to collective long-term change.
Yeah. I think now would be a good time. I like it when the panel mixes it up, don't you? I want to get the mayor back in, since you had something to say before, to talk about the strategic mobility plan, the racial equity initiative, and all the things that are happening, because you said, yes, we are making progress. How will these lead to a more equitable Charlotte?
Well, that's going to be a big question, but I'm going to take a couple of points here to make.
Definitely.
You know, when we talk about the silos, I completely agree and understand that. But the foundation for some of these things have got to be strengthened and ready. And that really requires tough decision making. It means that we have to have consensus on what we're trying to do. It means we have to have commitment to fund these things. We're great at short-term success. when the problems that we're talking about now require a long-term funding scenario, it requires commitment to the people in this community, and it requires that we engage the community deeply in these discussions. These are very hard things to do. I think we're up for it. So let me go to transportation, for example. The medical school is going to be built in 2 years. They're going to have a campus, 10,000 jobs. 5,000 of those jobs will not require a 4-year degree. We have a job desert on the east side, down Albemarle Road. How quickly can we get that bus rapid transit line to come down Independence Boulevard and get to the medical campus so people can have a job? All of this needs integration. I think these collaborations are important, but the integration of thinking about what we're doing now in transportation, what we're doing in land use and opportunities is so very important. The mayor, I'm going to go back to the mayor's racial equity program. I think that we've forgotten why we did this. We've forgotten about George Floyd and the protests. We've often not talked enough about how we had protests in our own cities. We forget we have 41 low-performing schools in this community, and COVID did nothing but expose even more and deeper disparities in health care, child care. All of this is going on at this one time, and yet we still have the issue of coming together to build a foundation that is equitable in terms of the ability for people to live in the city with a wage that makes it possible for them to be here. My first term for mayor, my slogan was, if you work in Charlotte, you ought to be able to afford to live in Charlotte. I quickly disbanded that idea when we started seeing some of this development around, and we weren't able to keep up with providing enough affordable housing. So let me go back. I get on a little bit of a stump speech here because I care so deeply about it. When you think about the integration of all of these efforts and initiatives, I mean, when we started working with the Land Trust, nobody knew what it was, but you have done a phenomenal job, and you know this. And we have contributed land, you have made it, we have bent rules, things that this city would never have done before. Government has had to become a lot more flexible, reaching out to extend itself beyond the traditional keep people safe, pick up the garbage, and make sure that the toilet's flush. That's what we used to talk about. We don't talk about that anymore.
Yeah.
So let's talk about racial equity from my experience of all that we have gone through. I think that we failed to realize how close we were to not being able to sustain after COVID some of the major initiatives that we have or major institutions we have. Take Johnson C. Smith University. This is a private HBCU in our community. And during COVID, they did not have the enrollment that was necessary to actually have a real strong financial and sustainable plan. And if you look at that university and what it means to this community, what it means to the West Side, we had to do something about it. So out of the $250 million, $80 million will go to Johnson C. Smith University. And we all know that once you do something like that, other money follows. But we have to show some successes. So this is an action stage for us. It is a transformation of this university. And we know that the private sector has agreed to support those students with internships during the summer. People forget that when you're the first person in your family to go to college, and summer comes, you're going home, and you don't know whether there's going to be a place for you at home, or you have a job, or you even have the food that's sustaining you during your time as your freshman year. This community has stepped up and said, we're going to provide internships and jobs for the Johnson C. Smith students every summer. We're going to talk about the skills that they can acquire and make sure that if they are comfortable and agree to what they want to do and we have a place that they can do it, they will do it in Charlotte. That is a big step for us. The next thing that we have to do in the mayor's racial program is around the corridors of opportunity. And these are our neighborhoods that have been left behind. And we are never going to get to equity if we don't bring everybody forward. That's what equity means, is that you're not defined by your race anymore, that you don't have determinants saying, well, this determinant impacts you because you're a person of color. So success is when we can create small businesses, neighborhoods that everybody's proud to live in. Not necessarily meaning that you're rich, it's just that you feel like you are at home in your space. That's what we need to do. And then the final thing that the program addresses is having Black and brown people be successful in this business community. The number of opportunities that we see for growth and development in the world of commerce should be extended to Black and brown people. But to do that, you have to provide a pathway. This isn't going to change overnight, I know this. But we've had generations of inequity. So let's think about how we move the generations forward coming with equitable opportunities. And I hope that people realize that this is not just a moment in time. This is going to take years. But if we don't do it now, what will we do? What will we have? And I don't want to be that community that didn't grab the brass ring when we had the opportunity to do so.
Thank you. Cherise, the mayor mentioned about you should be able to live in this community and how tough that is. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the issue that we all see of the gentrification in minority communities. It doesn't seem to be slowing down. We talked a little bit before the show on that. So what is the Land Trust doing, and what do folks in the community have to say about what is going on and what needs to be done to maintain the character and home ownership in these communities?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that we hear from residents is that this is not new. So a lot of the communities that we are serving that are currently gentrifying are historically Black communities where individuals that have lived there for generations have also experienced displacement from urban renewal and redlining and such. And so I think that's really how the Land Trust was born, was based on the resilience and strength of community members who said, not this time, that we're going to fight back this time, that we want to maintain our homes and our communities. I also often hear stories about their neighborhoods being unrecognizable. So there's a lady, Pernice, who lives in Enderley Park, and she talks about how one day she was riding the city bus and she looked up and for a second didn't recognize where she was and almost missed her stop because she didn't recognize her own community. And so residents talk a lot about that. We hear stories of individuals that live in some of our communities that have shifted to month-to-month leases where sometimes their landlords give them a week or less to vacate a property so that they can sell it or flip it or do whatever it is that they want to do to be able to leverage the current market. And so can you imagine being a low-income individual and having to move your entire life in less than a week? So these are stories that we hear all the time across our community, stories of displacement, but also like stories of resilience, because amidst all of that, we also hear individuals saying, I want to own a home. And we have a pipeline of home buyers. We don't list our homes on the MLS, so we are very integral to our value of creating staying power for residents. And so individuals in these communities come to us and sign up, and we have people all the way, aged all the way up to 65 years old, where this will be their first time purchasing a home, but believe that they have the opportunity to be able to do so in the communities they've called home for so long because of the work that we're doing there. And so really what we are contributing is staying power for these residents who have lived here for long periods of time, who typically have homes that have been passed down from generation to generation that they are now not able to afford due to rising tax values. And so we create home ownership opportunities. So this is an asset that they have that they own. So nobody's going to sell it from up under you. This is your home, and you can be here for as long as you choose to be here. And that's what we contribute to the solution.
And you're seeing some progress even with this trend of these large companies and funds buying up homes for cash, and your model is working?
Yeah, so the model is working. It's incremental, so we're moving slow. We are grinding a little bit in Eli's terms, but we are making some progress. I will say, just to speak to that I think that sometimes, so I don't want to take away from the fact that the challenges that we're facing in our community are very complex, but sometimes I think they're also very simple, right? Like gentrification is really just, basic economics, supply and demand. And so really in a wealthy city, how can we leverage the funds and the wealth here to be able to get in control of some of this land to ensure that we can maintain affordability? At the end of the day, if we're able to gain control, purchase the land, have the buying power that we need, then we can shift units, we can shift properties to affordability and meet the demand that's there for affordable units that has been proven time and time again. So it is possible for us to be able to compete. It's just, where is the will? Where is the funding to be able to support that? Can we create that consensus, as the mayor mentioned, and can we shift from rhetoric to action?
Great. She was looking at you about talking about the funding and the will and.
Well, it's true.
Yeah.
Money matters if we're going to support change.
Well, we have much more to discuss, and we're going to come back after a break with more. I'm Mary C. Curtis. This is Equilibrium, a WFAE public conversation.
Mary.
Good evening, it's 7:40. We're coming right back to our WFAE special Equilibrium, a public conversation on race and equity in Charlotte in just a moment. We're broadcasting live from Project 658 in Charlotte. You can stay tuned right here on 90.7 WFAE on the WFAE app, or watch the conversation live on WFAE's Facebook page. More information about our race and equity team's coverage at wfae.org/race-equity.
Okay, so we're back in 1 minute.
While you're at it, sign up for our newsletter, Equilibrium. When you do, you'll also have an opportunity to be part of the larger conversation we're having about race and equity. Subscribe today at wfae.org.
Okay, 30
what
seconds.
Zelensky symbolizes is really an existential problem for the Kremlin, which is that he's someone steeped in the Russian-speaking culture of the post-Soviet space. And despite all that, he wants to take his country on a pro-Western path and does not want to subjugate it to the dominance of Vladimir Putin.
I'm Michael Barbaro. That's Today on the Daily from the New York Times.
Ahead at 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
We're back. I'm Mary C. Curtis, and you're listening to 90.7 WFAE, and this is Equilibrium, a WFAE public conversation on race and equity in Charlotte. Now, I know, Sherry, that you had something to add a little bit to what Sharice was talking about.
Yeah, and I'll try to be brief. The work that Sharice is doing is phenomenal, so vital and necessary, and I wanted to speak to your question about progress, because she can't do it alone. And to say, we often talk about, they can't afford to buy a house, or those people over there. It's me. It's proximate to me. I am 37. I have an advanced degree. So does my husband, one of those from an Ivy League institution. And we are struggling to find a home that is affordable to us. I think we think about it being over there or something those people are dealing with, but Charlotte is quickly becoming expensive for all of us. And so we want... We too want access to opportunity, and it would be wonderful if we could be with Black people in that opportunity. And so while Sharice can't do it alone, we need policy to support that. So as we think about the work of the 2040 plan, for example, it's important that folks are able to stay in their home, but we also think about mixed income environments, knowing that from the report, if someone born into low means is placed in a high opportunity neighborhood, their economic mobility exponentially grows. So just thinking about the programs we need now, but the policy we need forever to make it true for everyone.
Great, yes.
Yeah.
I love your point. It's not them, it's all of us.
Yeah, it's all of us.
All of us. Daniel, speaking of that, your work and your local initiatives involve many areas. You do advocacy and education efforts on issues like civic engagement, immigrant rights, racial justice, health disparities, economic mobility, taking in so many of these conversations we're having tonight. So tell us a little about the local initiatives and how you are establishing priorities and strategies and action.
Yeah, absolutely. So Welcoming America works across the country, and I've had the opportunity to see this kind of work unfold, not just here in Charlotte, but in so many other cities. And so I think that's one of the things that we've been able to really encourage local folks here is to learn from other communities and what they're doing on all these areas. That's very important. One of the things that I've really seen over the past 8 years or so has been a greater emphasis on the city Office of Equity, Mobility, and Immigrant Integration. And it has led to greater coordination across immigrant and Latino serving organizations. It certainly has led to the city developing a language access plan that allows for folks to access services in their language and sort of set that baseline. And has worked with other cities across the country to coordinate some of these access to language efforts as well. Certainly, COVID has uncovered a lot of things that we all know in terms of what are the disparities, both in terms of health, education, workforce. And so the city has been working to try to bring together through this office a comprehensive approach to this work. When it was mentioned earlier about this task force report and how multi-sector collaboration was happening, that's something that Welcoming America works with local communities. We have to bring together the public sector, the private sector, government to really work on these issues and create strategic plans that really address the need. But it needs to be informed by the local community. And so a lot of times when we're having conversations in a lot of rooms, like the one we're having here today, right, how many are the folks, how are the folks that we're trying to address, where are they, and how are we making sure that we're getting their input into some of the solutions and the ideas that we have. So it's important for us to continue to keep that in mind as we think about this work and how we move forward as a city. So I think that those are some of the ways in which we're working with the city of Charlotte and some of the work that they're doing. We're going to have the Welcoming Interactive, which is our national conference here in Charlotte in May. And so that means that we're going to have over 400 practitioners from across the country come to Charlotte to share their work that they're doing around immigrant inclusion work, but also to hear about the work that's happening here locally in Charlotte. So I think that's a huge win for the city. It means that folks are be able to come here and to see what's happening. And also to understand what are the challenges and the barriers, because we can't just talk about some of the great things that are happening. We have to talk about the challenges and the barriers, because those are the same challenges and barriers that other cities are facing across the country. And it's through conversations and through the exchange of ideas that we'll be able to get that much closer to having more equity in our communities around all of these issues as well. And the last thing I'll mention is that the city of Charlotte is going through what we call the Certified Welcoming Program, which is a program for local city and county governments to see if they're really welcoming in terms of their policies and programs at the local level. There are currently 12 communities across the country that are certified welcoming and 8 in the pipeline that are going through this audit process, the city of Charlotte being one of those. And so I think it speaks to the elevation that this Office of Mobility, Equity, and Immigrant Inclusion has had in the city to really think about these broader issues around immigrant inclusion work at the local level.
Thank you, Daniel. I think it's interesting you're talking about cities learning from one another, and it brings up the question, as we're looking at the different models and what works in Charlotte, are there any other communities that we're looking at that we're saying, well, we don't want to be like that, or this is a model and we want to copy that? Are we taking bits and pieces from other communities to see what might work for us?
Well, that's an easy question, I think, for Eli and I. It's done all the time. The way that government works nowadays is much more driven by data than you can ever imagine. I mean, we can count a lot of things and describe, traffic, for example, is a really data-rich source for how we do long-term planning. The 2040 plan in and of itself, it's almost a data document, and with conclusions based upon that. When we talk about, we have a commission in the city right now dealing with displacement and what kind of initiatives, and we talked about we're the 15th fastest growing city, so what are the 14 in front of us doing, and to actually go in and visit with them when possible and to get that information from them so that we can choose what practice works for us. But Eli, I know the university is a real partner in this for our efforts.
We want to speak to that, Eli?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of things in other cities, like you said, that we can take bits and pieces of. You know, I know Austin is doing a large transit plan, and they've put, I think, $300 million, I want to say, towards anti-displacement as part of that. So they're trying to proactively get ahead of the gentrification concerns by doing things like land banking around transit lines when they're being built. I know that there's discussions about that in Charlotte right now. I think that there are different initiatives like making transit fare-free, or spending a lot more on local affordable housing subsidies that Charlotte can look at. But one challenge that I think we have to acknowledge is that Charlotte exists in the legislative framework of North Carolina. If you spend much time in city government meetings, it just comes up a lot that we're Dillon's Rule state, and some things that local city leaders might like to do, like mandating certain amounts of affordable housing be built in new developments or developers paying a fee, aren't possible in the power that we have right now delegated from the state legislature. So that's something that always comes up as we look to other communities, is we don't have the same power structure and governance as some of our peer cities, and we have to really work within that framework and figure out what can work in Charlotte.
That's why the partnerships are so very important between the business community, the philanthropic community, because there are initiatives that are very important that we just can't do. And it's very difficult to explain to people that, Raleigh, anything that we do, Raleigh has to give us permission. And I grew up with a dad who didn't give me a lot of permission.
Sherry, you talked about that a little bit, that we really need a lot of partnerships among organizations that do the work you do, businesses, because you don't want to duplicate that effort, because you all have the same goal. And you also actually wrote a column hitting back a little bit at some criticism that the Opportunity Task Force hasn't generated the changes it promises. And you made the point that the results would take time because systems of racial and economic segregation combined with public policies and business practices that divided our community were generations in the making. And they just won't disappear with the snap of a finger. So could you speak to that and how you can make progress and measure it even while folks are impatient?
Sure. As you said, Mary, this has happened over generations, over hundreds of years. Systems of inequity and policy, intentionally or unintentionally in business practices and in our everyday life. So it's going to take us generations to get out of it. That being said, we're about 8 years now outside of the Chetty report, and there is a lot we as Charlotte-Mecklenburg need to be proud of. The amount of funding that has been raised for particular initiatives, the coordination around initiatives such as the Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative, the eradication of the pre-K waiting list. Several nonprofits redefined their strategy and budgets to align towards the task force report, which was directly aligned to equity. And again, we are continuing to have the conversation 8 years post when the report came out. That in itself is a tremendous accomplishment, which is saying Charlotte is getting smarter and continuing to stay committed to the effort. The second part of your question around measuring progress, and to add to what Eli was saying, and the mayor, data is what's going to be at the core of this. And not just numbers, but also qualitative information from the community and learning from other areas that are doing the work. So one of the primary questions that I got when I came on board around measuring progress is what happened to the dashboard? Everyone wants to know what happened to the dashboard. And so what we're doing is what we're calling an opportunity index that will answer 3 questions through a portal. The first is, what progress have we made? How can we look at the data that's available to us in our community and nationally to gauge progress over the course of the past 8 years? The second one is, where can I find XYZ data? When it comes to data, we talk about it all the time, and unfortunately, it's not available to everyone. So how can we create a portal where nonprofits, government agencies, et cetera, can access the information they need? And then lastly, which gets to Eli's point, is what would happen if? So if Charlotte is looking to do something creative, how can we enter the information that we do have to give us some predictive information about what could happen? And so I think all of those things need to be at the center and everyone around that same information to make sure we're driving in the same direction, again, around collaboration.
Yeah. We're getting to the end of our hour. I can't believe it. This could go on forever, but I did want to, we looked at the past, and now I want to look at the future a little bit and ask you all to weigh in on, if you're optimistic and why, what do you see as Charlotte's future now that the city is starting to learn from and come to terms with its past? And yeah, what is your vision and what do you see? And are you optimistic and why? So, Daniel.
Oh, I was hoping I would go last. To just say, yeah, I agree with everyone, what everyone has said here.
I'm not going to get away with that.
Yeah, you know, I was reading an article that talked about there's 104 people that move in here every day, newcomers that we have to the city of Charlotte. And so I think about how, when I think about the city of Charlotte, in the future, I think about a city that is very vibrant culturally and economically, that embraces diversity and what people bring to the table as far as their lived experiences and who they are, but that doesn't lose sight of the folks that have built this city and that have contributed to the city for a really long time, and that we can do both. We have to be able to live in a world where we can do both things: welcome newcomers, help them be part and included in the cultural and economic vibrancy of the city, but also making sure that we're not losing sight of all of the communities that have been here for a really long time. So that's what I really think.
What about you, Cherise?
Yeah, so I think I see our city, and I am hopeful that we will have equitable communities where everyone has the opportunity to flourish. I think that we've had a lot of conversations. We have a lot of data. I think that we know what the challenge is. And so I'm excited about the opportunity to shift from the conversations into like actionable solutions, recognizing the intersectionalities, as Sherry mentioned, and realizing that like it's very important for us to develop equitable communities, which is much different than just creating affordable housing or creating a healthcare facility, but how do we integrate all of that into one to ensure that everybody has access to the opportunities and the resources that they need to thrive?
Yeah, Mayor Lyles.
I would like to live in a city where if a child is born, that they will know that they will be able to succeed.
Sherry.
I am certainly hopeful. Honestly, as I look to my brothers and sisters on this panel, to the leaders like the mayor who've led the way, we have what we need to do the work. It's remaining committed to it and moving towards action together.
And quickly, Eli.
You know, in some ways, it's hard for me to just be totally optimistic. I mean, I'm a former reporter, still a reporter at heart, so if you look at a lot of the metrics that we've seen already, like housing affordability, school achievement, they've really gotten worse in some ways in the last few years. We're facing big challenges, and COVID, of course, has laid that bare. But at the same time, I mean, look at this panel up here. I think I'm the whitest person up here, and I'm only half white. We're up here with a black female mayor of Charlotte, a diverse panel representing people from all over, and, you know, we've made incredible progress in this community.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have. Now, this is certainly a conversation and an effort that will continue in our city and region. So I want to thank our panelists, Mayor Vi Lyles, Sherry Chisholm from Leading on Opportunity, Cherise Blackman from the West Side Community Land Trust, Daniel Valdez from Welcome America, and Eli Portillo from the UNC Charlotte Urban Institute. I'm Mary C. Curtis, and this has been Equilibrium, a WFAE conversation on race and equity in Charlotte.
EQUALibrium, a public conversation on race and equity in Charlotte, is a production of 90.
Thank you. That went really fast. So now we're going to shift to our Q&A portion of the conversation. We've got microphones here and here. If you would like to ask a question, go ahead and come right on up.
And when you do come up, if you could just give your name and where you're from, and if you're representing an organization and you want to share that, please do.
Hi, my name is Jose Cordero, journalist working for La Noticia, and I would like to know what are the most important findings every panelist has discovered through these conversations, through your investigations and your contact with the community, but focused on Hispanic and Latino community. I know Daniel has more contact with this community, but I would like to know every perspective, because each one of you works in a different area, has different kind of jobs, and it's good for us to know every piece of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't mind starting, if that's okay. I appreciate your question. It's something that we're being thoughtful about at Leading on Opportunity. As mentioned, the task force report really centers generational inequity, and that has most significantly impacted Black folks in our country when we talk about generations. What we also know is that Black liberation has often led to the liberation of our other brothers and sisters. So if we think about the policies that Black people have advocated for, they've often created doors of opportunity for immigrants, for women, and other people of color, which is, as Daniel said, I can't be free until Daniel's free. So when we think about the work that is required in our community, it must be inclusive of the Latinx and Hispanic community as well. And at Leading on Opportunity, we need to get better about being smarter and thoughtful about what that inclusivity looks like. So I would say we've done some work and we need to do better.
I would say we at the Urban Institute and UNC Charlotte, as we look at data specifically, we've seen that there are challenges in identifying and categorizing and understanding data. You know, data is collected in the census, and it's easier if it's just black or white, frankly. There's a lot of nuances in Latino community data. There are people from many different nationalities. There are people whose families have been here for generations, and there are people who are new arrivals. So I know every community is diverse. No community is monolithic. But I think that that is one of the things that we really need to elevate and understand is the diversity within the Latino community and what that means for different facts, and frankly, at a nuts and bolts level, how we collect and analyze that data.
So 15% of our population is Hispanic now. And so when you think about that, that is a growing community, and it grows just like any other community. There are going to be people that are in school. There are all kinds of opportunities there. I think the most important thing for us as a city is to make sure that we live up to our values of welcoming, of making sure people have the opportunity to be included, and that we accept the diversity and we don't try to run from it.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Good evening, Dr. Yvette Miller. I'm the Executive Medical Officer for the American Red Cross. And so I have two questions. Mayor Lyles mentioned the medical school coming. And we haven't had much conversation tonight about the expansion of Medicaid. So if anyone has any conversation around that, I'd love to hear it. And then the other question I have is, you mentioned the Leading on Opportunity and how you have to really, I guess, structure the way that you share information. And I really encourage you, I use a lot of data and a lot of statistics, in my work. And I frequently go to the Leading on Opportunity site, and I really, really use that information for presentations and, just to inform my community. So I do encourage you to please make that information as transparent as possible and as easy as possible to plumb. So thank you. and I'm waiting for comments about Medicaid expansion.
That's the state.
That is, I think, something that Governor Cooper has worked so hard to get, and it has not been accepted by our legislature. But I do think that there's, when you talk about a glimmer of hope, in this year's budget, they have a task force that would talk about the implementation of accepting Medicaid. And just recently, in the last several weeks, the president of the Senate, very powerful Senator Berger, has said, I think there's a path forward. That is unheard of in the last 4 to 6 years. So we're hopeful, but you know, Raleigh can be Raleigh. So let's know that the governor has asked and fought for it. It really is going to depend on the majority party legislature to make that decision. We ought to all people without adequate health care in the state, and there's no reason to do it that way.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Devanya Govan Hunt, and I'm with the Black Child Development Institute, the Charlotte affiliate. And thank you for the conversation. I think it's an incredibly brave conversation. I'm oftentimes thinking about the folks who are on the ground in the community, and I've heard at least 2 of you talk about specifically those people, our neighbors, our grandmas, our aunties, our sister friends that are sitting on the porch that knows everybody in the community. And I'm proud that Charlotte has gotten to the point where we're comfortable having these conversations. But how do we communicate on a lower level maybe the need to use a strength-based lens when we talk about the progress that we've made, but not use the resilience of our people and our community to just sit in these conversations. Just sit in these conversations, but to use, to move with a sense of urgency and actually call out some really practical, tangible, bullet point action steps. This is what we are going to do, not this is what we should be doing.
You teach me something every time I come out, and I appreciate that. I will say that for the first time, we've created a council committee with a focus on what is our framework for equity and what do we do for engagement. The world is very different. You know, you can't just go to a community meeting and walk out and think that you've accomplished something. The participation and the ownership has to be in the community, and I think that is one of the hardest efforts that I will see in my time serving this community. How to do exactly what you said, change that philosophy to what are our strengths and how do we engage people. So we have a council committee, Dimple Ashmira, Braxton Winston, and Renee Johnson are working on a framework for that. And they're working with Federico, who is our true leader in a lot of our work around diversity in our community.
I would love to answer. So Dr. Govan Hunt is on our board. We recently added her to the Leading on Opportunity Council. And I lift that up because when Leading on Opportunity started, we committed to being 50% corporate and 50% community-led in our council. And I wanted to make sure that we were true to that and also getting to the non-traditional voices in the community. So that's the first thing. The second piece, I think it's important to think about when we consider community engagement is they, which is us, considered the benefactors, but they are indeed the experts. So in the Leading on Opportunity work, we are making an effort to lift them up as our consultants to help us define our strategies for community engagement and to tell us what the right thing is to do. So I think it's making sure that we're not just thinking about like what's the solution and at the end let's get community engaged, but to have the community at the forefront as experts designing what the process and outcomes should be.
And I just wanted to add to your point about not sitting in these conversations indefinitely. I think that's, really a powerful point because we're, 8 years out, and as we said up here, people are saying, okay, we've had conversations and conversations. What's the action? And I think that gets back to measurement. If we really find some ways to measure what we're doing, then we can hold ourselves more accountable. And I think that's why the measurement piece is going to be so key going forward in terms of making sure we're not just in some kind of, infinity loop.
Yeah, I always hate that term, that phrase, be a voice for the voiceless. Everybody has a voice. I mean, sometimes people don't listen, but it doesn't mean that people don't have a voice. And so, you know, as someone who grew up in West Baltimore, we all had voices sometimes, but people wanted to speak for us. And if you don't tell your story, someone else will, and they'll get it wrong, and they'll distort it because nature abhors a vacuum. So it just means getting people engaged and listening, because you'll learn something every time. So I really appreciate your comment. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dante Anderson. I'm a Charlotte resident and Charlotte native. I have a question to direct to Ms. Blackman. First, I want to thank all of you for your leadership, your thought leadership and service to the community. But Ms. Blackman, I think your work within affordable housing is so critical, and I agree that it's a key tenet for equitable opportunity. I'm wondering if you've thought about how some of your best practices and successes would work in other corridors and neighborhoods that look very similar to the West Side.
Yes, we definitely have. So we actually are working to expand beyond the West Side and to serve the larger Charlotte-Mecklenburg region. There are several groups that reach out to us on a daily basis. One of the things that I'm most proud of with our work and within our organization is that we have lived our values and we've walked our talk. So now community members reach out whenever there are challenges within their community, when they see rezonings happening that they're not supportive of, they reach out to us. And so we've had some conversations with groups from Greer Heights, from Howey Acres, which is NODA adjacent. We've received some phone calls from the Still Creek area with communities that are very similar to that of West Charlotte, where they are gentrifying. And so our membership base, I think in 2020, voted to allow us to expand beyond the West Side. And so we're working towards that incrementally.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jared Herms. I'm a proud resident of Charlotte, and I also sit on the Community Advisory Board for WFAE, so proud to be on that as well. So, obviously last week, the Black Political Caucus was in front of the government, and they had mentioned some very valid concerns about the transit plan in regards to displacement in other areas. And obviously, you guys addressed some of the elephants in the room, which obviously includes that we are a Dillon Rule state, so there can be constraints to things that we can do. So, think about we have a very good transit plan that can very much improve the lives of Charlotteans, but also we are in a Dillon Rule state. So, what are things that could either be considered, have been thought about, or would like to be able to think about in regards to a lot of the Black Political Caucus's concerns that be able to alleviate some of those very valid concerns, because again, they are in regards to the transit plan, be able to make it more equitable for the city of Charlotte.
The day that the caucus, the Black Political Caucus, had the press conference, I spoke with the president and I said to her, thank you, because the people need to come and speak about what we're doing. Now I'm going to have to say something, Eli. Austin put $250 million in for housing along the transit corridor, but that's the first time they've done an affordable housing project. We've been doing it for over 15 years. So we're way ahead of some of the places. Sometimes the bright and shiny parts they like to talk about, but then you say, and the $300 million is for infrastructure improvements, and it's over 13 years. My goal is to have this community stand up and say what the policy should be. Now, I have my belief that we ought to be acquiring land. I have a belief that the one thing that Austin did that I really like is that every apartment development in a transit-oriented development zoning area has to have 10% of 60% AMI included at their cost. We need that in Charlotte, We need you to start learning about it. We need us to all think about what it would do to make that kind of difference when we're talking about a new line where we can have affordability. Now, there are all kinds of metrics you can do, but we got to figure out what that will be. And that money has to come out of the sales tax money. We can't stop doing what we do now, particularly with our focus on homelessness, the 30% and below. So I had a conversation with the people that are working in this area as the community representatives, and I said, we need to continue what we're doing, and then we need to figure out what more we need to do. And both of those things are very important in the upcoming 2 to 4 years for this city. So I hope that all of us are thinking about that and we'll push for it. I hope that the community stands up and endorses it and calls it out. We need the participation of the community to say, we're willing to pay this tax, but only if it gives us the kind of opportunity that we're seeking for people to live in our community and be able to have a good paying job. That's just simple basics that we need.
Good evening. My name is Alvin Jacobs, and I'm a photographer and image activist. Part of a growing economy of black artists, creatives, and one of the 50 inaugural Leading on Opportunity champions as the only artist. My concern is that we are rapidly losing an important cultural sector of our population, one that is proving to be increasingly valuable post-pandemic. See, artist creativity in the form of cooking, architecture, fashion, filmmaking, and of course photography, but it seems we are only as valued as one would assign a grade school finger painter. My question is, with the increasing competitiveness in housing and disparity in wages, how can the individuals charged with the beautification of our city, specifically black artists, continue to call Charlotte home if we lack the access to call Charlotte home? Increased resources can and have been made available. There's been a lot of money allocated. But can there be an equitable system implemented that isn't based solely on the banker bro standard of social capital? Cultural meccas such as New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, and others are celebrated because of culture, not government. We cannot continue to do our very best helping to make Charlotte a world-class city if we cannot find space to create, both literally and figuratively. You calling us to create beauty, to capture your likeness, to fill your offices and homes, and we're calling on you to make an equitable space for us. So the question is, how can artists, specifically black artists, continue to thrive in a city that we can no longer afford?
I'll start from a housing perspective, and we've worked closely with Alvin. There's a model, I visited Tennessee, and there was a model there where they created an artist community. And they subsidized down the home ownership units and put a studio in the rear of each of the units, and created a artist hub of sorts to create their own arts district. So through the land trust, I've been looking at how we can leverage the land trust model, because the community land trust model exists both for affordable housing, but also just to permanently preserve land and space, whether it's commercial, green space, or whatever. But I've been considering how we could leverage the community land trust model and utilize innovative mortgage lending options to be able to support artists as well as local activists in being able to obtain accessible and affordable housing. I think there's a lot of components that are important to make that accessibility possible, but I do think that there's some options through innovation where we can create affordability, provide deep subsidy, especially in a wealthy city that has subsidy available, to be able to provide housing opportunities for artists.
And I'm going to say that it goes kind of to what I was talking about during the show of Charlotte having, two minds, wanting the growth, and we're a city that loves growth, and then everyone cries for days when the cool local restaurant is bought up for someone to put an apartment tower, but we love the growth. So I think at some point when we talk about culture, when we talk about art and local food, there has to be some deeper conversation about what do we value more as a city, the growth or keeping some of what's here and what's created by the people here and what makes it a cool area. And historically, I think it's fair to say Charlotte's usually chosen growth. You don't see a lot of rezoning petitions denied because the community really loves a funky old building. You don't see a lot of, economic development projects that someone puts the brakes on it because it might displace an artist. So I think that growth that's really baked into our DNA is at the core of a lot of what you're talking about.
I would also say, and I agree with what both of you have said, there are certainly lots of different examples of how communities are making this work too. I think also in terms of placemaking and how the local community, local government in particular, how are they integrating artists into projects, economic development projects, and making sure that those opportunities are shared widely across the community. And also in thinking about the role that the local government can play in continuing to support things like festivals, right? I've chaired Charlotte Pride for 6 years, and we know one of the biggest expenses for us is the logistics and operations of the festival. But if we had some support from local government to do that, we could invest that money in artists and folks that we are bringing to the festival, right? Expand that budget, and I think we can do that. Other cities have been very successful in doing that, and I think that there's an opportunity for the city to do that kind of work and really thinking about how are they contributing to the growth of artistic and cultural events across the city, and making sure that there are also places where folks can host events in other communities, because a lot of times we have to go to certain spaces because that's where the infrastructure is, but sometimes there's an opportunity for us to create those kinds of infrastructures on the west side, on the east side, and all these different places around the city too. So how are we, from a placemaking perspective, thinking about integrating artists and culture into that work?
Mm-hmm. I ditto what Daniel said. Leading on opportunity, me in particular, I am coming into my understanding of the creative community and want to ensure that we include creatives and creatives of color in a way that honors and celebrates and doesn't exploit. And that's something I want us to be thoughtful about. So I welcome the opportunity to talk because I want to learn. And so if there's something you could educate me on as we think about our strategy moving forward, I would love that.
And I think all of them should join the Arts and Culture Committee.
Hi, my name is Juan. I'm a resident of Charlotte, and this commentary is for the mayor. So any talk about equality should include CMPD culture or cop culture, right? So part of the cop cultures or lexicon goes, it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. The next call may be your last. Comply and then complain, right? So that's part of cop lexicon, part of their culture. I'm of the opinion that soldiers, Marines, and cops are like, from personal opinion, soldiers, Marines, and cops are like well-trained dogs. They follow the rules of the civilian overseers. So anytime that something happens, when there's a shooting, when somebody's wrongly arrested, like I hear a lot of complaints from the general population, but usually the mayor does not say anything. She usually talks about how she grew up in a segregated South and she can empathize with all of this, but now she's in a position to actually be in our side and say something. And I bring up this whole culture thing because the current police chief seems to be very amicable to changing the culture of CMPD.
I don't know that I heard everything that you asked, but I think what you've asked me to respond to is the culture of our police department and how that is changing or will change. And if you'll, the mic just a little bit down, that I'm sorry, I just couldn't hear it. Thank you.
Well, okay, so Chief Jennings seems very open to changing the culture of the police, right? Some of the things that cops say is better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. They also say stuff like, the next call may be your last. My favorite is comply and then complain, right? Which is like very like eerie. When this young woman, Jasmine Horns, was arrested, you didn't comment on it. When Jasmine Horn was arrested, you didn't comment on it. You said that the Internal Affairs was going to look into it, and you will comment on it afterwards, right? Usually when things with police brutality or police violence occurs, you usually cite the fact that you grew up in a segregated South and you remember going to the library, but that's no longer the case. You are the mayor. We looked upon you for leadership. So when stuff like what happened to Jasmine Horns happens, we look to you for leadership. We look to you for to make a commentary on it, right? So I know that Internal Affairs cleared the officer. It was just an incident of mistaken identity. He typed in the wrong name and he arrested this young woman. But for the 15 minutes that she was in the back of that car seat, she feared for her life. She thought that she was going to die. A lot of brown and black people, when they see the cops, they don't think about like, hey, the cavalry's coming. I was like, okay, what do I have to do to put this officer at ease so he will not feel threatened by me, right? So again, what I said at the top of the hour, from personal experience, I know that soldiers, Marines, and cops are like well-trained dogs. We serve a civilian oversight. So it's up to the mayor and the city manager to put those individuals in place and to push for a change in culture.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being so open about how you feel and giving me some perspective on what you see as my role in this, and I appreciate that. It is a tough time to deal with this, and I remember that case very well, and I know what it's like. I have a son who, when he was 16, I gave that same kind of sense of I won't go through the long story, but he was in college and was hauled in for a robbery, and I get that, and I know what it means. So I have to say this about my personal feelings about policing. We want to have a police department, as you stated, with a chief that leads in a way that treats people fairly. We want him to have officers that understand their job is to protect and not to harass. We want that, but it doesn't always happen. The fear of police is deeply ingrained. When we talk about up here generations, from slavery, that's how policing in some ways in the South came about. The old history of how that works. And I would hope every day that it's not what we have here in our own city, but I recognize it and I understand it, and I can understand why Jasmine was afraid. I can understand that. But at the same time, that we try really hard to create a space where we can have this conversation. We've worked through a number of issues with a citizens group chaired by people that really, they were not one category of people that come in and support one effort or one face. They actually had multiple stories like this. So we've done some major things, for example, eliminating tear gas. We've done a lot of work around how we have our police officers trained. I don't know if you recall, but we had a customer service program set up, and people in the newspaper ridiculed us for it. But Chief Jennings believed in it, and he did it anyway. We're trying. I'm not saying we got it all right. My specific role in this is that we try really hard to address these concerns when they come up. But you can't help but hurt when it does happen, and I'm not always there. I just have to admit, as a person, I am not always going to be able to be there. I do my very best. And when the community asks me to speak to it, I speak from both my head and my heart to say that we want a department that helps us keep peace without harming people. That's what we want. And I do believe that Chief Jennings is working in that direction. I also know that it's difficult. If there are things that we can do that you see that would help us, please continue to let us share it with us, help us get it better. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. My name is Toya Bailey. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for True Lion Federal Credit Union. My question is basically around the Black wealth gap. I'm just curious what you guys feel about the fact we're in this city full of various major banking institutions, and I was just wondering how you felt we can bridge that gap with the Black wealth gap.
We did a study on the racial wealth gap a year or so ago in partnership with Bank of America that is on the Urban Institute's website. Can check it out. I'm happy to send it to you if you can't find it. And a lot of it goes back to housing. You know, we've got this system where so much wealth and intergenerational wealth specifically is passed down through housing. And if you don't own, you are at a huge disadvantage there. We've also got neighborhoods, east, west, north of Uptown, where 50% or more of people are renting. Most of those residents are Black and brown. So we've tied so much wealth to housing, which is historically so racialized and has so many issues, going back to redlining and legal segregation and deed restrictions and racial covenants, that I think that as we look as a community, that's one of the most important ways that we can impact this problem long term, I think, is through the work that you're doing and really helping more people to own their houses and not just have access to a place to live, but that intergenerational wealth building opportunity that is tied to that.
One thing I'll mention too, aside from housing too, is education is a huge sort of marker for wealth for folks in the future. And so what are we doing to help expand services from pre-K to college readiness programs and everything in between, summer learning programs, all of those programs like Communities in Schools, Charlotte Bilingual Preschool, all the work that they do around helping kids be successful in education and getting up to sort of the reading and the math levels that they need to in order to be successful, whether they're going to college or whether they're starting their own businesses or doing whatever in terms of their sort of life goals. That's also an important piece of this gap that we have as well in our communities. And we're also seeing that COVID in particular has erased a lot of the wealth that folks had saved up to deal with the unemployment that really impacted a lot of Black and brown communities as well. So that's another sort of piece of work that's, I think, in terms of research, we haven't really seen the impact that COVID has had on the wealth gap, and I think that it's exacerbated that for sure.
Oh, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, just briefly to follow on what Eli said, I just think that some people in this community don't realize how much racial segregation has to do with the residential segregation and the wealth gap. I would have talked to people who are supposedly well educated and say, I really couldn't live in the house I'm living in if I had tried to move there prior to 1968 with the Fair Housing Act. There's legal segregation saying that you could not sell or rent to anyone not of the Caucasian race. And if you were Black, you had to pretty much have a pass that you were there to work on the garden or clean the toilet. And they would say, oh, really? And even after 1968, if you had tried to move there for a lot of years, it would have culturally, you would not have been welcome. And sometimes in neighborhoods like that all over the country, you would have been met with violence. Mm-hmm. And so people couldn't get into those houses when they were reasonable. So now that they're worth millions, or I don't know what mine is worth, but when they're worth a lot more, they can't get in there. And the only reason I could get in there is I moved here from New York, which was a high ownership, value place. And so you could get into that. And that has really affected generations. And I just don't think this community realizes how affordable housing and the housing policies of the past have really crippled so much when it comes to the wealth gap. So part of it is an awareness before you have that commitment to do something about it that's going to really take a lot of work. And it's not just saying, well, everything's equal now, so why don't you? Why don't you?
I remember the story of the GI Bill. My dad was in the military, came home from the war. You got a college, a scholarship for college, or you could get a job preference, and you could also get a mortgage for a house. Levittown in New York being a big example of that. And when you were black, though, you only got a job preference. You could go to work for the federal government, and that was the only thing that the soldiers that returned of color had as an opportunity after serving their country at war. And that's what Mary's talking about. If you have, I read this somewhere several years ago, Levittown was like $40,000 for the house. That house is now worth $900,000. Imagine you could send your kids to school. You could take out a loan on your house to send your kids to school. The African-American soldiers that came home did not get that. And I think about that as the country's greatest, just the inability to see and take advantage of an opportunity. And it was large part because of the rules that the southern states had to control the idea that desegregation was wrong and that they would stop it at any means necessary. And those were all things that happened. And it's still here today. Johnson C. Smith neighborhood surroundings looked just like Myers Park at one time. But they couldn't get a loan to fix up their houses. They had to rent boarding spaces and do all kinds of things just to be able to live. It's just such a deep part of this country's history that sometimes I wonder, how are we going to get past it?
Well, one thing won't be when we come to education to not teach these things, which, you know, that's a whole nother show.
Okay, rock, paper, scissors, shoe. Hi, my name is MK Holmes. I'm with the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, but more importantly, I come to you as a member of the LGBT community. As we continue to see states like Florida and Texas implement disgusting discriminatory legislation against trans people, and as we ourselves continue to heal from HB2 as a city, how can you speak to the work that you all are doing benefiting or creating a safe environment for the queer community in Charlotte, specifically trans people of color? Thank you.
Thanks for that. I'll start. As I mentioned earlier, I chaired Charlotte Pride for about 5 years and have seen the importance of creating safe spaces for folks. But it needs to go beyond just that week or beyond that weekend, and it needs to be embedded into all the policies. And as we mentioned earlier, I can't be free until my siblings are free, and that means race, that means gender identity, gender expression, all of those things as well. I think Charlotte recently passed a non-discrimination ordinance. We know the first chapter of that and what that led to. We need to continue to work to bring those spaces into the general public and these ideas. I remember having a conversation with James Ford when the task force report came out. And one of the things I mentioned is that not a single word of queer or LGBT folks were mentioned in that report, right? And very little when it came to Latino or immigrant community. And I think that I wanted to make sure that folks understood that we understand where sort of the context and the audience and sort of the groups that were being called out in the report, and rightly so. But if we wanted to avoid the kinds of things that we were seeing, as far as the generations, we needed to make sure that we're embedding those conversations moving forward. And I think that that's an important thing. And so I commend that the city of Charlotte passed a non-discrimination ordinance. I was hoping that we would be the first city to do it in the state, but we weren't, but we were able to do it. And a lot of folks came together and advocated very heavily to get that, and we need to continue to do more for not just the city, but all sectors of our community to really think about how we're talking about sexual identity and sexual expression in our community, because it's impacting a lot of folks. When it comes to economic opportunity, trans folks, Black trans women in particular, have been suffering the most. Black trans women, Charlotte is still one of the most dangerous cities for Black trans women in the country, second or third. And so these are things that we cannot forget as we think about sort of this broader work around equity and inclusion, because if we're talking about equity and inclusion, we have to talk about these things as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add, all the more reason for us to focus on the issues of housing and jobs and education. Those issues impact the LGBTQ queer community directly, and all of us as well. So we just at Leading Opportunity, we are doubling down on those efforts.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Winston Robinson. I am the executive director of a grassroots nonprofit, Applesauce Group, and my question is for Mayor Lyles. How are you today?
I'm doing
on the hot seat.
I am doing great, Winston. Now, this has to be a lob, a very easy lob, okay?
Well, I hope it is. I hope you have the solution.
Oh, now I'm in trouble.
But now, just really touching on what you meant earlier, you mentioned land acquisition, and even to kind of piggyback off the story of your father and that injury gap that persists. Last year, Charlotte was second behind Atlanta nationwide, with homes being purchased by investors at 32%. Can local government implement any? Home buying is already tough, even if you are, a great applicant. Is there a way to interfere, I guess, with market forces to kind of help people out, I guess? You're picking up what I'm putting down, right? It's tough out here.
We're kind of laughing about it. It's one of the worst trends that's going on in this country right now. I mean, Asheville has investors buying neighborhoods and making them Airbnbs permanently. That's all they are. Whenever an investor comes into a community, generally the impact is that it is looked at as an investment, it is rental, and it's managed by someone that doesn't answer the phone after 5 o'clock. And the cost of having cash deals at this point in the housing market, Sharice, I know you know this, it's just people will walk up and they have cash right away. They don't have to go apply for a mortgage online, get some kind of credit report, and 6 months later you've got a house. It's just, I don't know, I'm not a banker, and I don't know how this phenomenon is carried through. Eli might know a little bit better, but I do know that the impact of it is that we have got some major neighborhoods that exceed 30% of investor-owned properties. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how neighborhoods can band together, because there's very little that a legislator can do or an ordinance that the city can have that can do and pass muster from those that are in that sector. And so in some ways, this is probably the one thing that if you have a neighborhood association, that you have to kind of protect yourself. And it's going on across the country. It is evident in almost every part of North Carolina, in all of our urban communities and most urban communities. So I'd love to hear, Sharice, if you've heard, or Eli, if you've heard any way to deal with this. It's not working.
I'll just add, so I was telling them backstage, and this is just my personal belief and not necessarily reflective of the land trust, but I don't believe in market forces. I believe we create the market. And so I think that just like investors are able to go and purchase properties using cash, I think that we can take a note from their book and maybe create innovative funding streams that don't have as much red tape, that don't take as long for us to be able to access the funds so that we can compete with them. I think it's very possible to create that type of model where we can leverage funds quickly and purchase properties just as investors are doing that. For us, like specifically, we're working on the establishment of a private equity fund where we will use that solely to be able to buy up the block and to be able to purchase these homes and to have quick cash that we can access where we don't have to go to a bank. It is our fund, and we have these investments in our fund for this purpose. So I do think that it's possible. Sometimes it's challenging for me to hear that we need to place the responsibility on community members that really didn't create the challenge. I think that it's important for us to recognize how systems connect and how we can leverage these systems to be able to combat some of the market forces that we have allowed to be created.
Yeah, and I'll just add quickly, we did a study last year at the Urban Institute about this issue, and at the time we found that 4.3% of all single-family houses in Mecklenburg County were now owned by these so-called Wall Street landlords, large out-of-state companies backed by private equity. I'm sure that's increased by now due to the purchasing, but I'll say the next wave of things that's coming, a lot of these companies are pivoting to build to rent models. So they're not buying on the open market necessarily as their default strategy anymore. They're building whole new subdivisions from the ground up as rentals because that's more efficient. So I think that that is going to be the next big wave of things we see. There are already companies that have raised billion-dollar funds to do this. And as much as we're talking about these companies buying houses on the open market now, in some ways we're kind of talking about last decade's trend with that because they've already moved on to the next thing of building rent-only subdivisions from the ground up permanently. So that's what's coming.
Wish it could be better news.
Yeah. One more question. You got it. You're it.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jonathan Gartner. I am the executive director of Guardhouse. And I specifically loved hearing that $80 million was being provided to JCSU students for summer internships because primarily for us, we're working with those college students of color. My question to everyone is to speak to what opportunities currently exist in retaining the talent that we're developing here in Charlotte. There are over 50% of college students of color that exist here in Charlotte alone, and that is higher than the average here in North Carolina. So what is currently either being considered or being done to make sure that the talent that we're investing in, that we're developing, is actually going to be able to stay in this city to be able to do the work that's being done?
Well, thank you for the question, Jonathan. We are seeking to answer a similar question, and President Armbruster also challenged us with that. So we recently added President Armbruster from JCSU, the president from Davidson, UNCC, CPCC, and Queens to our council to define a strategy. What we heard from our college presidents is that there are individual or nuanced activities happening, but no, we're not capitalizing on the collective that you talked about. Since there's so many universities here, how might they come together to identify what it looks like to make a collective ask of the business community? So in terms of speaking to what is happening now, I cannot speak to that, but we are trying to define a collective effort that we can present to the business community around what can be done moving forward.
The two things that I would offer is that the city is working on what we call, I can forget the name, if it's Charlotte Hires, a plan that does try to look at the collective and keeping talent. But I do believe the most immediate action that we will see are the internships that we plan on having as a part of the racial equity program, because those internships are not just for the summer. All of those folks that are interning will have the opportunity to be offered a job upon graduation. I want to give a shout out to Atrium. They have pledged that those students coming out of Johnson C. Smith will be able to have a scholarship to medical school at the new medical school for approximately to 20 to 25 students doing that. So if you know what it costs to go to medical school, you know that that is a tremendous gift to those students, but it's also a tremendous gift. I think you helped me reframe something. It's also a tremendous gift to this idea of closing the disparity gap in healthcare, because we need minority doctors and that can come in and establish that relationship in our communities especially. So I'm very grateful for Atrium, and I'm really grateful that we are beginning to think differently about how we get people to commit to our jobs in our community. So thank you.
Well, that's a nice positive note to end on. Some tuition at medical school. Maybe I should go back to school. I want to thank all of you for coming, for participating in this conversation. Of course, you need everyone to be part of a conversation. And I want to encourage you to continue the work, keep in touch with the folks on the panel. I want to thank our wonderful panel. And also follow WFAE's Race and Equity team, the work that, with a lot of exciting things, a lot of exciting projects to come. And if you have any ideas, stories, definitely get in touch. And of course, the mayor's door is always open, too.
Always open.
Yeah. So again, I want to thank Sharice and Sherry, Daniel, Eli, and Mayor Lyles, and all of you. And give yourselves a hand.